Hello, everyone, and welcome to Health and Happiness at Work. This podcast is for busy working adults trying to figure out how to better take care of themselves and others. My name is Katie, and I will be your host. We are here today because adulting is hard and because busy working adults spend more time at work than anywhere else. We're going to have real conversations about real life and, most importantly, swing into action on the biggest opportunities. We're going to talk about ways to layer health, fitness, and wellness directly into your workday so that you feel fantastic. I cannot wait to dive deeper into each of these topics related to health and happiness. You are not alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 11. We are tackling a topic today that comes up frequently in our culture. I even hesitate to say the word, but it is my intention to shift your perspective or relationship with this word in many ways. And so today we are talking about self-care. I thought about using the phrase next level self-care. I thought about using the phrase self-care 2.0. I may stick with that. That's the beauty of creative projects is it can evolve and I can decide later on and just kind of sharing my process with you. When we look at something being a 2.0 version, it's typically thought of to be more advanced or superior. And so, yeah, I do feel good about that. When we say advanced self-care, I certainly wouldn't want that to be overwhelming or intimidating because it really isn't incredibly complex. Like I said, it's just a different, perhaps more mature way to look at self-care, use self-care considerations. I have really been working with my own experience of self-care, both at home and at work, and given my passion for bringing health, fitness, and wellness into the workday, we are really going to look at this through the perspective of how can we make this work for anyone, regardless of where you work, when you work, how you work. Sometimes that is an excuse to stay stuck. Like I will meet with groups and introduce ideas or ways of practicing self-care into the workday, and I'll hear, nope, that won't work. And it will just get shut down. So my hope is that as you're listening today, you stay open-minded. My hope is that we can shift perspective related to self-care. Again, I do think it's a little cliche how it's used. You've heard some things about self-care on repeat, like put your oxygen mask on first. If you can't take care of yourself, how will you be able to take care of others? And yes, that's lovely and great and true, but I think it's overused. And so I do think my hope or my superpower is explaining things slightly differently based on my testing or hands-on practice with self-care and stepping into lots of different work days. So we are going to really look at self-care many different ways. And maybe a way to think of it today is how do we flex or flow with self-care? Because guess what? Life is not static. Life is dynamic. So that's maybe a good headline to start with. I think sometimes, especially with life, we hope or want it to be the same, to be steady, to not have a lot of surprises. Well, guess what? If you're alive, there is change. So change is inevitable. There are many other aspects of being human that are just a part of the deal. And so if you're frustrated because life keeps changing, well, yeah, it does. But that's part of being alive. And it also allows for some really amazing things to happen as well. So we sort of have to look at this change as continual opportunity as well. I do think in our culture or in my industry, people talk about self-care and it goes straight to the physical, right? Thousands, not thousands, millions of people still struggle to maintain a healthy body weight, to have this healthy relationship with food and exercise. And you've maybe heard me say this before, I see mind and body as inseparable. But we hear a lot about physical self-care. I thank God that we are in an era where we are talking more about mental, emotional health, social health. Obviously, mental health is critically important. What I also want to bring up today, and this gets avoided, I think, in the workplace, is this idea of soul level or spirit self care. And so when I say soul or spirit, it doesn't mean religious. It means getting out of your head and into your heart and into your gut and into your passion and into all that animates you. And again, I think myself included, we get so stuck in our heads about everything. And that keeps us stuck with the physical self care and the mental self care. But if we can work a little deeper and say, what makes my soul happy, soul level satisfied, soul level passionate, I really think that's what people want. I think that's what people want at work. I think that's what people want in their relationships. But we don't talk about soul or spirit. It's like that's what we are, but we kind of get hung up on these other ways of thinking about self-care maybe. So, as we're going through some of the coaching, I'll call it today, think about what your soul needs. So maybe we want to call this soul level self-care, but again, I worry and I shouldn't or I don't want to. That's a better way to say it. I don't want to worry about what other people think, but it does I think and again, my line of work, working with businesses or organizations, it gets a little woo-woo when I lead with soul level self-care, but I think that's what's missing. So maybe I just run with that. We'll decide when we get to publishing this out into the world. I've got time to make that choice. So, gosh, I'm going to go a lot of different directions, but again, I think this will help move the needle. And that's what people really want. So, first, I want to talk about what self care is and what self care isn't. It could be so easy to take a choice or an activity and to abuse it and say, oh, this is self care. And this is probably the number one thing that's tricky when I speak to groups is that there are people in the group that need to get activated and energized and I don't want to say do more, but be more active and engaged in their life and find a hobby or get off the couch and get walking. And there are likewise people who need to do the exact opposite because they don't have an off button and they overdo everything thinking that that's what qualifies them. Right. So the person who over exercises, over diets, overcompensates, and doesn't slow down. So there are people that need to get active and recharge in that way. And there are people that need to slow down and get onto the couch because they never let themselves. So we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I want to talk about some ways to think about it. I do like the idea of filling a bucket. You know, if we have a soul bucket or a mind body bucket, it potentially gets depleted and we have demands that fall on our shoulders or our responsibilities. And so if this bucket is getting depleted for a variety of reasons and in different amounts, understandably, we need to pour back into that bucket. Another common analogy or visual is we oftentimes charge our phones, or our devices, but we seldomly charge ourselves, recharge ourselves. So, a couple of different ways to think about it. I also hear a lot from folks that people feel tired, so it could be a fatigue or a healing that needs to happen. We can look at what it is and frame it up a variety of different ways. I also want to touch on what it isn't. As I mentioned, it's not an overabundance of anything. So if you do get onto the couch and watch a few episodes of something, that's great. It can be a slippery slope if you then watch 26 episodes of something and the entire weekend all of a sudden is a wash. But again, we have to be careful with this because if you're sick, if you're under the weather, if you're healing, if you're really needing to recover from something, then that choice might be a really great one. But if you're already depressed and sad and lonely, that choice potentially keeps you there and compounds the situation. So we all have vices. We all have ways that we avoid or procrastinate or attempt to cope, right? So, kind of just noticing an overabundance of anything, eating, drinking, shopping, even watching TV or reading a book. If that's all you do and it checks you out from other aspects of life, then that can start to work against your well-being. But that's really tricky. It's I don't want to say easy, but it happens. So overabundance, overindulgence, I put in that similar category. There is this thought that we as humans either seek to numb, meaning make the feeling stop, whatever the feeling is or the anxiety that's overwhelming or uncomfortable, whatever this emotion is, I want it gone. So, therefore, maybe it's a quick fix, but a lot of people will refer to it as numbing. I just want to feel better or different now, or I don't want to feel at all, or I don't want to care so much. And so that's where the numbing can come. And there are some authors who will say that zoning out and only watching TV or zoning out and only reading, that is another way of numbing because you're avoiding whatever it is you don't want to experience or address or handle. So it's difficult to be describing some of this and perfectly describe every scenario because it's not that simple. We all have these nuances of our personalities, but I put it all on the table so that as you're listening, you can start to notice your own choices and behaviors and say, okay, which ones are healthy and which ones might need a little attention because it's actually not helping you to feel better. It's an illusion. In the moment, it feels better, but in the long run, you may actually feel worse in whatever way. So we're really going to focus on how do we take care of ourselves in such a way that we feel at our best personally, feel at our best professionally, feel at our best from a soul level, excitement, energy perspective. And so next I want to talk about having a sense of flexibility or adaptability with self-care and again, activities, choices, habits. We're going to take a deep dive on habits, routines, and rituals as we get toward the end of this session. But I think having a certain amount of flexibility, grace, patience with yourself, that's part of it too. I will hear people say things like, "Man, I had this really nice routine and then I don't know what happened. I just fell out of it. I stopped doing it or something else happened and I don't have this great morning routine anymore." And I look at them and I say, "And that's okay because there are different seasons of life." And that's really how I like to think of it is seasons of life. If I think about what my morning looked like without kids, it's different than what my morning looks like with kids. My morning with infants looked significantly different than my morning with preteens. My morning in the summer looks markedly different than my morning during the school year. I don't think I even have to say anything further. And that's just one example with being a working parent. So with this, I use this word a lot, comes a certain amount of relentlessness to figure it out. We always say this now, the new norm, but it's mostly what works for you right now and what works for you in January might be different than what works for you in June. And don't beat yourself up over that, but say, "Oh, awesome, I'm human and life's different now and this is what works now." Yes, there's comfort in routine and being able to predict how things will go, but just allow yourself to have different seasons of life and know that that flexes within a calendar year even. Next, I want to talk about how much. How much self-care is enough? Well, I can't totally answer that for you. I can give you some ways to think about it. It's maybe fair to say that some people aren't practicing any self-care. They've heard the word tossed around 100 times, but they're just in survival mode, right? And go, 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 hop from thing to thing to thing, take care of others, and maybe there isn't any self-care at all. So for that individual, maybe doing one thing a day is a great place to start. And we do a lot of this in our programs at Wellness Collective, where it's just start with one thing a day. And maybe you already do one thing a day. Great, celebrate it, write it down, see what's next for you. But if you're not doing one thing a day, then one thing is a great place to start. And that one thing for some folks will be a 5-minute practice, or it might be an hour-long practice. It depends on what it is. And so you'll notice I'm not really talking about specifically what to do for self-care. I'm really focusing today on other variables for consideration. And then you get to decide what the self-care actually is. And obviously I'll give some examples, but more on the strategy or approach, if you will. So what I have in my vocabulary that I like to think about is the dosage of self-care. Like, what's the right dosage? What I have discovered for myself personally is there are some times in the year or in life that I don't want to say stupid amounts of self-care, but it's kind of shocking to me just how much I need to, I don't want to say function, but to feel supported. So there have been times either with anxiety or depression or grief. These are things I talk about freely because I deal with them, as do many Americans. I'm not alone, so I'm very comfortable talking about my mental health. So with those things in particular, when I am having an episode, I'll call it, because when and if I do have any depression, mine's a little bit more episodic. It comes and goes, and it's sort of like a phase. There are times like this where I think, oh my gosh, a 5-minute mental health walk isn't going to cut it. It has to be way more than that. Meaning there's not one thing I do that helps me to feel better. It's not like I just go to therapy once a week or every other week, and that's the thing that brings me up or perks me up or is healing to me or supportive to me. It's almost like morning, noon, or night, or not only many times during the day, but many modalities is the other thing I want to touch on. And so for me, there are some habits or choices in the morning. I talk about this, whether it's the morning reading I do, writing or journaling, which I find really supportive, sitting quietly, having sort of a slow start to my day. All of these things are really helpful to me. There are things I actually do between meetings, whether it is taking a walk, lighting a candle, using aromatherapy, taking a few deep breaths, laying on the floor of my office to meditate for 5 minutes, scheduling an appointment with a therapist or practitioner. There are things I do at night. Again, more reading or writing or exercise or calling a friend. But then again, as I mentioned, many modalities. So there are physical components like yoga, or for me, dancing or stretching, or even just like progressive muscle relaxation. So there are some physical modalities, chiropractic, a couple times I've sought that out, different modalities that have helped me physically, but then modalities for therapies, like I said, traditional mental health counseling. I've tried EMDR. I've loved hypnotherapy. I've talked a little bit about that. Different types of coaching I've sought out. So there's kind of that component. There's how I schedule my day. And so actually how I schedule my day has proven to be really a game changer. And so building more pauses or moments of transition into my day has helped me. And so I share all of this because I was talking to my therapist and I thought, here I thought one thing was going to be the solution. And it really is many it's many choices, many modalities, higher dosage. So I don't offer this up to overwhelm anyone like, oh gosh, how am I going to go through my day and take care of myself, every hour of the day? I more offer this up to say there are many opportunities, and maybe you are someone who can do your 30-minute workout and say, yeah, I feel great. But maybe you're someone who does that and says, all right, I don't think that's enough. And so the dosage or volume of self-care, how you might need to rework your day, how you might need to add supportive habits or moments into your day, it can really demand, more than just that one thing a day. That's, I think, where I want to head with that. And yet, I'm going to offer up another perspective that for some folks, self-care 2.0 won't look like more. More won't be better. It'll actually be the opposite. Some people need to hear the message or would benefit from hearing the message. It's okay to do less. Let's unschedule you. Let's take things off. Not necessarily remove self-care, right? But remove demands or responsibilities or anything that's kind of sucking the soul or life or energy out of you. And so your dosage of self-care will land wherever you think it needs to land, but in terms of other pieces and parts of your day, other responsibilities, or even what you're trying to fit into one day, it might actually need to be less. So this herein lies the challenge, right? It is not one size fits all. It is something for you to decide. But we can't decide if we're unaware, if it's not even on our radar. So as with most things I speak about, the first step is just noticing the state of the union, noticing from a place of not judgment or beating yourself up. We're going to get to that topic here shortly, but not necessarily accepting things as is, but looking at the day and saying, do I like that or do I want to make a change there? And again, we don't want to get stuck in our thinking mind all the time, but periodically noticing and reflecting will open your eyes to what you want to do about the situation. The next direction I think is best for us to head is this idea of personalization. And this has already sort of come up today that, like I said, it's not one size fits all. It's not even the same solution for yourself in the same month and year as we talked about. So I think what's so tricky about health, fitness, and well-being is it can come across as very black and white, as do this, not that. You pick up the magazine, you see the headlines, you hear what your friend or neighbor is doing, and that's the new thing to do. Oi, TikTok is the same way. I saw on TikTok, that if I eat this one food, it's going to change my life. Well, it might change someone's life. It doesn't mean it's going to change your life. I was actually hanging out with a group the other night and someone was feeling very passionate about what they'd learned about something dietary related and they said, "I want everybody to know this. I just learned this and I want everybody else to know it." And I thought, "Okay, if that's important to you, great. That's a great tip for you, but I don't need that tip." So I say this because we can have all this pressure to adopt a certain way of eating or the it exercise of the year or this is good and this is bad. And I won't cite the author, but the eat this, not that. Like, I don't find that a helpful way to think about things or to approach things. One of the coaching techniques that I actually use and we've had some good feedback on is let's focus on what the body needs, not on what the body can't have. So people get fixated on, I can't have this, I can't have that. No sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol, no gluten, no this, no this, and I'm not going to have dessert, and I'm not going to have this. And let's focus on what the body needs. And you will know that answer many times better than I know that answer because you know what your gut feels like. You know what your mind and mental health feels like. You know what works for you and what doesn't. So if people find something that they're raving fans of, great, but that doesn't mean that you have to pick it up and run with it. It's just a possibility on the continuum of options. Similarly, I think there can be limiting beliefs about what is enough. So we've already talked a little bit about how much and dosage and that type of thing. But coming at it from a slightly different perspective, this has come up, for example, when we talk about fitness, right? The person who thinks they have to do a 60-minute sweaty workout, so therefore they don't do the 10-minute easy workout because it's not good enough, or it's not hard enough, or it's not enough, or people who say, oh, I'm not going to do or take yoga because I don't sweat enough. Let's not dismiss the benefit of something just because it doesn't meet whatever standard you've set for yourself. So with that, I think back to, I'm using this new phrase called game changer. And this is like when I have an aha moment or a learning or a tip that I'm like, whoa, that one is a game changer because I use it every single day and it's changed my life. And so I believe I've referenced this documentary before, but maybe I'm not. I do a lot of speaking and I apologize that I can't keep it all straight. I'm human. Actually, no, I'm not going to apologize for being human. I'm just going to acknowledge that I've maybe already told you this before. So the documentary is Stutz. Gina, have I talked about this? Is this familiar to you?
I feel like at some point we have, but it's been a while.
Gina says, yeah, maybe. So if you haven't watched the documentary on Netflix, Jonah Hill produced a documentary called Stutz. He struck up this amazing professional relationship with his psychiatrist. And this guy has so many knowledge bombs. I mean, I was taking copious notes during the documentary. And I also think that we all have teachers or ways of learning that we find the person that just says things in such a way that you're like, oh my gosh, that all really resonated for me. And so I have a couple of authors that I feel this way about. Sonia Choquette is one of them. And Stutz, this documentary, and this psychiatrist, he just said things and drew things in such a way that it was massively helpful to me. So anyways, the thing I took away from that documentary that has maybe served me more than any other tip is this idea that all actions are equal. The way I interpret that is taking initiative to do something counts. It doesn't have to meet a certain criteria to be quote unquote good enough. So if you're someone who is struggling to get started, you're struggling to get up and do your day, the example that he gave was get up and take a shower. That counts. That counts. And the more you do actions and put one foot in front of the other, the better you will feel and the better self-efficacy and confidence you'll have. But I have a silly example. I gave this the other day when I was talking to someone to explain this concept, but I get very overwhelmed and anxious with clutter, yet I have a lot of clutter. And it's sort of like, oh, well, I don't have a whole week to organize the office or whatever it is. And I'm an avid reader, so there's books everywhere. So I was kind of playing with this idea of, what if I just put one book away? Every time I think about it, I'm just going to put one book away. If you heard my decluttering strategy was I'm going to put away one book a day, you'd probably be like, girl, you are never going to get anywhere with getting your house organized if you're putting away one book a day. But guess what? It's working. Because eventually, in actually a pretty short amount of time, a couple of weeks, there's going to be no more books to put away. So this practice also aligns with kind of this idea of tiny habits with BJ Fogg, but all actions are equal. Now, this is kind of a silly example that I'm giving, but it's helping me. And so when I feel anxious or overwhelmed and get to that place of freeze and inaction because I don't have the energy or I don't have the bandwidth or I don't have the time, whatever the barrier is, it removes the barrier if I just do something insanely small because all actions are equal. If I just have that mindset. And so any small choice is still meaningful and profound and helpful. And that has been a game changer for me. So my encouragement would be, don't talk yourself out of doing something because you think it's not enough. If you operate from this place of all actions are equal, then it is enough. That choice to act is great. You don't need to do more. Kind of jives with, it's not necessarily always such that more is better. Better is better. But yeah, just Do something, anything. It all counts. I think that's where we get into trouble is when we think something has to look a certain way for it to be good enough or for it to count or for it to help or for it to move the needle. Sometimes just the smallest action is still what's needed that day. Thus far, we've talked quite a bit about helping yourself, ways to think about self care, ways to approach self care, strategies, permissions almost to give yourself. Let's talk a little bit about not only helping yourself, but helping others. There is an insanely common phrase in our vocabulary, maybe some people more than others. And recently, my therapist pointed it out to me that I say the word should quite a bit. And I even did it earlier today, and I then immediately rephrased it. And so, what happens with shoulds is there's this inherent sense of pressure that something needs to happen. I should do this and I should do that, and I wonder if I should do this, and someone said I should do that. And so fast forward, 45 minutes into my therapy session, and my therapist looked at me and said, "Stop shooting on yourself." Maybe this phrase is not new to you, but it was new to me. And I thought, yeah, I really am shooting on myself a lot. Should, right? And should is different than I am so excited to do this weekend. I cannot wait to get to dance class tonight. That sort of speech or enthusiasm is different. Like I want to, I need to, I can't wait to. And I'm not just talking about being intentional with your word choice, but like authentic. So when something just authentically comes out that way, I think the soul is super happy. It's coming from this place of heart and gut and intuition and desire and want. And this comes up so much in speaking to people. Folks will say, I just can't get motivated. I just can't get motivated. And okay, well, motivation is desire and want. So whatever it is, the better question is, what do you want? Because this thing that you're thinking you should want isn't doing it for you. It's not doing it for you. So the better question is, what would make you leap out of bed? What would you feel excited to do? What would you want to do? What would you leap out of bed to do? So anyways, I think we need to be really aware of this pattern of thought and speech, myself obviously included. And so I'm being really careful not to should on myself and really careful not to should on other people. That's the other thing that came up for me. Because how often have you been somewhere and someone says, you should go do this or you should consider this? And maybe it comes from like this really lovely, helpful place. But if it doesn't get you excited and you're actually navigating something else and you're already stressed and feeling bad about yourself, that might not be super helpful. So a phrase that might be more helpful, especially for people in your network or in your household, is, have you thought about X, Y, or Z? Have you thought about checking out this class at the community center? Have you thought about journaling? Have you thought about writing? And when you just ask a question, it's a little bit more gentle and curious. And yes, you're offering an idea, but you're giving them the autonomy to say, I have never thought about that in my entire life. And then they get to own their thoughts and feelings and beliefs on that and tell you whether or not that makes sense for them. So I think that's a nice way to approach it. We obviously want to help other people, but we need to be really careful not to tell them what they should do. But things to think about. Food for thought, ideas, options, these types of things are helpful. As we start to wrap up today, I want to talk about this idea of making it stick. So even though life changes, surprises happen, seasons of life, seasonality of the year even, all of this will happen. One thing that can and does frustrate people is when something doesn't stick. It's not a habit. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a habit versus a routine versus a ritual. All of them can be supportive in helping you to feel better, mind, body, and soul. And yet it's tricky. So when something is a habit, you no longer have to think about doing it. You just do it. For many of us, the classic example is brushing your teeth. You don't have to say or write a note to yourself, brush teeth this morning. It's just such a habit because it's just what you do and you've done it every day when you wake up and you're doing your hygiene or whatever. So, habits, another way I describe it is you do a habit like clockwork. It's predictable. It does not take a lot of mental bandwidth. It's something you just do. Like muscle memory might take over, physiology might take over. There is kind of a biological, psychological, social component to some of our habits. And the key phrase really is brain power or bandwidth, right? We have to think potentially about so many things all day long or make so many micro decisions. And when something's a habit, it doesn't take a lot of brain power. You just kind of do it. Like even driving home, you might have a habit of driving a certain way. So the second something demands more brain power, the harder it is to layer it into the day because it's that one more thing to think about. It's that one more thing to remember or to put energy into. And I think a common theme for busy working adults is how do I keep all the balls in the air? How do I remember to do things? How do I make time for it? How do I make it stick, right? So there are ways to approach habits, and I'm not going to take a deep dive on that per se. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on routines and rituals. There are a number of great books on habits. A lot of people right now are talking about atomic habits. People are talking about tiny habits still. I do like this approach of finding something you already do. You find an existing habit, and with habit stacking, you add another habit to the existing habit. So the existing habit is called an anchor habit. You then add the new desired habit to it. And there's a formula. It's B equals MAP. This is also from BJ Fogg. Behavior equals motivation plus ability plus a prompt. So for something to happen, an activity, a behavior, a habit, you have to have the desire. That's the motivation. You have to have the ability, like it's feasible. You have what you need, you know what to do. And there has to be some prompt, something that reminds you to do it. So that can be a really lovely approach for saying, you know what, I really want to make it a habit of self-care. I really want to make it a habit of, for me, if I stretch every single day, I feel like a new woman. So I could say to myself, when I brush my teeth at night, I do a stretch. That's how that works. Now, when we look at a routine, it is a series of behaviors or actions. And that routine may be a habit, it may not, right? For most people, the routine is habitual, but for some folks, maybe the routine changes depending on the day or the need. So you might have a self-care routine that you choose to do when you're feeling under the weather or when you're feeling run down or when it's a day that ends in Y. That would be every day. No, when it's a Sunday. So also think of self-care that way. What are several self-care choices that I might want to bundle together into a routine because that would feel good or comforting or supportive? There are infinite ways to use routines to your benefit. The morning routine, which we've spoken about on a past episode. You could have a lunchtime routine. You could have an evening routine. You could have a routine for how you transition from work or home. You could have a routine for how you start a meeting, end a meeting. You can make routines inherent in your work and life in so many different ways, and there can be benefits. And I think routines maybe feel a little bit more flexible sometimes because you're layering a few things together and deciding, do I want to make this a habit? Do I want to make this a clockwork, predictable, habitual thing? And then I also want to distinguish. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the difference between a routine and a ritual. So for me, I prefer to have a morning routine that's consistent for the season of life. But I also will use what I call rituals, which a ritual for me is a choice, an activity, a behavior, something I do when I have a very specific need. So, as an example, when I am sitting down at home to really, truly, deeply relax, I have this ritual of, tidying the space, lighting a certain candle, turning the lights a certain way, and kind of setting that intention for the desired outcome. It doesn't mean every single time I sit down on the couch at home, I do the exact ritual, but if I'm really looking to have a deeper experience, a specific experience, a ritual, a way of kind of honoring or celebrating or recognizing something can be really supportive. Relaxation could be a ritual, when you want to relax and really have that deeper relaxation experience. Maybe you do certain things to set the mood. So that's another way to think about self-care is there a ritual that supports you in some certain way? And again, it doesn't happen every single day. It doesn't happen many times a day. It happens as needed for a very specific desired outcome. So that's something to sit with as well. We have gone a lot of different angles and directions. That's always my intent. Ahead of each recording session, I don't write out everything I'm going to say, but I do a very visual brain dump, word cloud of like when I think about this topic, these are the themes that come up for me, and this is the way I understand it based on a few decades of experimenting and trial and error and what I hear from others and what I've experienced myself. So my encouragement for you as you walk away today is to really think about your day, think about your life, think about what it's like at work, and consider what self-care looks like given your unique situation. And as I mentioned, what I don't want to happen is you look at your workday and you say, nope, nope, I'm in my car all day long. There's no way I can do self-care. No, that's not true. When something gets shut down and it's a hard no, we're making an excuse or a reason to stay the same, and we're not willing to explore what's possible and figure it out. Sometimes we have to figure it out and we have to be willing to do things differently. So, whether you are on your feet all day, every day at work, whether every workday is different, whether you are a professional sitter, whether you are a teacher, I hear a lot from teachers about how difficult it is to take care of themselves during the school day because they're always on. Even over lunch hour, which is 30 minutes, somebody's knocking on their door, or a kid's walking up to their desk, or somebody's finding them in the lounge. And so there's really no, not great boundaries maybe for that particular career. I'm just using that as an example. There still are ways to practice self-care. There still are infinite choices in any given day. And using teachers specifically, I really have a vision that we can create this amazing win-win by including students in this self-care experience. If the teacher is needing to calm and steady and ground themselves, through meditation or stretching or relaxation, why couldn't the kids do it too? So there are ways to create win-wins. There are moments in everyone's day where you have free will, you have the ability to choose, even even in this office building here, when I get up to go to the restroom, it's not a big building. I could walk just to the restroom or I could walk a lap around the parking lot and then go to the restroom. So you always have choices, you always have options. You always have this ability to choose differently in your best interest. And I think sometimes possibilities or ideas get dismissed because someone is looking to stay stuck. So if you're looking to get unstuck with self-care, look at your day differently, look at the possibilities differently, consider how flexible it might need to be, figure out how to make it a win-win. You can get family and friends and other people involved with self-care. And maybe that's an important headline that I didn't think about mentioning today that I want to mention is when you take amazing care of yourself, other people will be inspired to do the same. If you're the person in the office that grinds and never leaves their desk, then other people are going to feel like, oh, I better do that too, unfortunately. But what if you're the person that inspires somebody to take a break or to go and get help or to slow down or to talk to somebody? If you're especially in a role where you're visible, at work or you're head of household, people are watching you, and it's lovely to be in that position of modeling the behavior that you want to support and encourage. And this is like such a silly example, but I have tried in the process of raising children to show them that it's okay to rest. So I will take a nap, a power nap, and I'll say to the kids, I'm going to take a little power nap because I feel like I need to recharge. And they say, "Okay." And they actually leave me alone and it's awesome. But I also even at bedtime was trying to model for them like, "Hey, my body feels really tired, my brain feels really tired, I'm gonna go to sleep." I was kind of struggling with their bedtime routine, but in time, they would come to me and say, "I'm tired, I'm gonna go to bed." So people are always watching, and I don't say that to put pressure on anybody to behave a certain way, but your choice to take care of yourself could be incredibly inspiring to someone else, and I think slowing down is a big message for me right now, and so I thought that might be helpful for others just to kinda come back to that soul level self-care one more time. Maybe spend a little time considering not just what mind and body need, but what does your heart need? Heart level, soul level satisfaction. How do we replenish that? I can't answer that for you. I can just coach these other directions, but let's get soul and spirit feeling satisfied and supported and recharged. And that's really where the magic happens. So, with that, thank you for tuning in and listening today. And I will be back next month.